Up until this point, we've been looking at transformations that do not affect the shape of the graph. Our next step is to look at something called a non-rigid transformation. A non-rigid transformation is one that causes a distortion in the graph either by stretching or shrinking it. This is different from what we have been looking at because the other transformations did not change the shape, did not stretch or shrink our graph. So an example of a non-rigid transformation would be if we were to multiply the outside of our parent function by some value. And we're going to see what happens when we multiply by a value of 2 and 1/4, a number that's bigger than 1 and a number that's less than 1, yet not negative. We've already seen what negative does to our graph. The square root of x, you should have learned from our section 1.6 parent function section, looks something like this. Goes off forever in that direction, and it doesn't have any values that are negative. Now, if we want to go through and figure out what the graph will look like when we multiply by 2 in front, so for our first transformation, we can plug that into our calculator. But if you think about what's going to happen, if I plug in a value for x and take the square root, I'm then going to multiply that value by 2. So my output is going to be double from what it was when I started in the original function. So for the graph of 2 times the square root of x, this is going to be double the value from the original function. So this is going to grow quicker than the original. Essentially what it's done is it has stretched it vertically so it is growing quicker than it would have if it had just been the square root of x. Our other type of transformation in this case would be if I were to multiply by a value that is less than 1. If I multiply by a value that's less than 1, it's going to end up shrinking the graph. If we think about it in terms of the values being plugged in, if I plug in a value for the square root of x, I would get out a square root of x. But if I multiply that by 1/4, that's going to end up making the value smaller than what I would have gotten if I had just done the square root of x. So for my 1/4 square root of x graph, this will be much lower on the axis than my original graph. So again, functions where I multiply on the outside by a factor bigger than 1 are going to end up vertically stretching my graph, and factors where I multiply on the outside that are less than 1 will end up vertically shrinking my graph.